I should have just bought a TV off Amazon. That thought kept looping in my mind as I sat in my truck, parked a few houses down from the address Craigslist had given me. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, barely lit by a single flickering porch light. Something about it felt wrong, but I was already here, and the price was too good to pass up. I took a deep breath, checked my phone for the address again. Harvey's house. I had exchanged a few emails with him earlier that week. His responses were quick and polite, but oddly pushy. He wanted me to come exactly at 7:00 p.m., not earlier, not later. Now, standing in front of his house, I noticed something strange. The front door was cracked open, not wide, just enough to show a sliver of the darkened hallway inside. A shiver crawled up my spine. I hesitated before stepping up to the porch, peering inside. "Hello?" My voice sounded small. No response. The silence inside was thick, almost suffocating. There were no sounds of a TV, no movement, not even the hum of an air conditioner, just dead, pressing quiet. I rang the doorbell. A second later, I heard something heavy shift inside, like furniture being scraped across the floor. Then, silence again. I should have left right then. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to go. But before I could turn away, the door creaked open wider. A man stepped into the dim porch light. He was tall, thin, and pale, dressed in a wrinkled button-up shirt that looked stained. His face was expressionless. His eyes were dark pits, cold and unreadable. He didn't greet me. He just stood there staring. For a few awful seconds, I was frozen. Then I swallowed and forced a smile. Harvey?" The man blinked once, then slowly nodded. I felt my stomach twist. Something about the way he responded. It was too delayed, too calculated, like he had to think about the answer. Still, I pushed forward. "I'm here for the TV, the one on Craigslist." Another pause. Then, "Come in." I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to. But I had already driven across town for this damn TV, and for some reason I didn't want to seem rude. So I stepped inside. The second I entered, the air changed. The house smelled off, stale like dust and something faintly metallic. The lights were dim, casting long shadows against the walls. The TV was sitting against the far wall of the living room. It looked fine, but I wasn't even looking at it. I was too focused on the mess on the floor. The rug was bunched up, and next to it there was a dark streak leading down the hall like something had been dragged. I stared at it. My mouth went dry. I felt the man's eyes on me. He hadn't moved. He was still standing by the door, watching me. I forced a laugh. Yeah. TV looks good. I'll take it." I reached into my pocket, pulling out the cash. I just wanted out of there. He took the money without a word, stuffing it into his pocket. Then something changed. His posture shifted. His breathing got slower. He tilted his head slightly like he was studying me. That was the moment I knew something was very, very wrong. And then, he moved. It happened so fast. 1 second he was standing there. The next, his hand was on my chest, shoving me backward, toward the door. I stumbled, barely catching myself before crashing into the doorway. "Go." His voice was flat, emotionless, like throwing out garbage. I didn't argue. I turned and bolted down the porch steps, ran straight to my truck, and peeled out of the driveway so fast my tires screeched against the pavement. My heart was hammering. My hands shook violently on the steering wheel. What the hell just happened? I felt scammed, but more than that, I felt lucky to be alive. Something had been wrong in that house. Something was still wrong in that house, and then it hit me. The streak on the floor, it wasn't dirt, it was blood. I called the cops. I told them everything. I thought they'd brush me off. But when they ran the address, their tone changed instantly. "Stay where you are," the officer said. "We're sending units now." I waited. 20 minutes later, I got a call back. I could barely process what they were telling me. The real Harvey had been found tied up in the bedroom, unconscious but alive. He had been attacked just minutes before I arrived. The man I had met? He wasn't Harvey. He was an intruder. The worst part? He had been planning to kill Harvey and take his identity, and I had walked right into it. They caught the man 2 days later. He was found hiding in an abandoned house a few blocks away. When I saw his mugshot on the news, I felt physically sick. His eyes. Even in the photo, they were the same. Empty. Cold. And I realized something else that still keeps me up at night. I had arrived early. Harvey wasn't supposed to have another visitor that soon. If I had followed the scheduled time, if I had gotten there even 5 minutes later, the man wouldn't have needed to rush me out. He wouldn't have been caught off guard, and I would have walked straight into a house where Harvey was already dead, and I would have been next. I found the listing on Craigslist late one night after weeks of searching. The rent was almost too good to be true. Just $400 a month for a room in a quiet, small-town house, with utilities included. The landlord, Greg, responded to my message within minutes, saying he wanted a reliable tenant, someone quiet and responsible. I met Greg the next day. He was in his early 40s, a bit awkward but friendly enough. The house sat on the outskirts of town, right where the paved roads turned into gravel, and was surrounded by dense woods that seemed to stretch forever. The place looked old from the outside, the kind of house that had been passed down through generations. But inside, it was surprisingly modern and well kept. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, cozy living room. Everything seemed perfect, except for one thing. "There's just one rule," Greg said, his voice a little too casual. "That door stays locked." He gestured to a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway just past my room. I raised an eyebrow. "What's in there?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just some old stuff. The basement's not finished, and it's not safe." I didn't press, I didn't care. I just needed a place to stay. And for the first few nights, everything was fine. The first time I noticed something strange was around 2 a.m. on my 4th night. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard Greg's bedroom door creak open. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, like he was trying not to make a sound. Then they stopped, right outside my door. I held my breath. My body went still. The house was dead silent except for the soft sound of breathing on the other side of my door. Then, after what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away, but not back to his room. I heard a soft click. The locked door. A second. Later, the door unlocked and opened. I didn't hear anything else, no footsteps, no movement, just silence. I barely slept that night. It wasn't a one-time thing. Every night, at almost the exact same time, Greg would repeat the routine. His bedroom door creaking open, standing outside my door. A long silence, then unlocking and disappearing behind the locked door. By the 6th night, my curiosity started to override my fear. Where the hell was he going? One night, I decided to stay awake. I left my light off and lay in bed, phone in hand, waiting. Like clockwork, I heard his door open, the slow, deliberate footsteps to my door. Then, silence. I gripped my phone tightly. Then, he moved away, and I heard the soft click of the lock opening. This time I crept out of bed and tiptoed to my door, just enough to peek through the gap. Greg was standing in front of the open basement door, motionless. Then, he turned his head sharply, as if he had heard something down there, and then he whispered something. I couldn't hear what he said, but whatever it wasn't meant for me. A second later, he slipped inside and shut the door behind him. I didn't sleep at all that night. I had to know. The next night, I stayed up again. But this time, as soon as I heard Greg open the door and disappear inside, I acted fast. I slipped out of bed, grabbing the knife from the kitchen before stepping into the hallway. My heart was hammering as I reached the basement door, still slightly ajar. The air was cold, heavy. I pushed it open. The stairs disappeared into complete darkness, and then a noise, a shuffle. Something was moving down there. I took a shaky breath, leaning forward. "Greg?" I whispered. Silence. Then, the whispering started again. But this time, it wasn't Greg's voice. It was deeper. Wrong. My stomach dropped. Something moved at the bottom of the stairs, and it wasn't Greg. I took a step back, just as Greg came, barreling past me, wild-eyed and shaking. He didn't even look at me. He just bolted through the back door and ran into the woods. I stood there, frozen, my breath coming fast and shallow. Then, from the basement, a soft creak. I knew I had two choices: run now or find out what was down there. I turned and ran. I grabbed my keys, my bag. I didn't even stop to close the door behind me. I never looked back. Years passed. I never spoke to Greg again. He never contacted me, but I never forgot. A few months ago, curiosity got the best of me. I looked up the address. The house had been abandoned not long after I left, and 2 years later it was demolished. There was a single news article. House condemned after disturbing discovery beneath property. No details, no explanation. Just a sentence that still keeps me up at night. Due to the nature of the findings, authorities have declined to release further information. I don't know what was down there. I don't want to know. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I swear I hear whispering. Selling old gadgets on Craigslist seemed like a smart way to clear out my stuff before moving. My apartment lease was ending in a month, and I wanted to get rid of things I no longer needed. An old tablet, smart speakers, and a gaming console. The responses came fast, but one stood out. A guy named Daniel messaged me almost immediately. "Hey, I'll take everything for the full price. Can I come by tonight? No haggling? No questions?" It was strange, but I shrugged it off. People like quick deals. I told him I'd be available at 6 p.m. Sounds good. See you then. That was the last message. At 5:20 p.m., a sharp knock hit my front door. I wasn't expecting him yet. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a tall, thin man standing on my porch. His dark blue sedan was parked sloppily in front of my house, half up on the curb. I cracked the door open an inch. "You're early." Daniel didn't answer right away. He stood there too still, too quiet. Then, after an awkward pause, he said in a flat, emotionless voice, "Sorry, I can wait." Something about the way he stood, stiff, unnatural, unnerved me. I forced a smile. Yeah, just wait in your car. I'll bring the stuff out in a few." He didn't move. He just stood there. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. But as he did, I noticed something bizarre. He didn't turn his head. His body pivoted, but his face stayed forward, staring at my house for a beat too long before stepping off the porch. That should have been my first warning. At 6 p.m. sharp, I brought the gadgets outside. Daniel was already standing by his car, hands in his pockets. I never saw him get out. I walked up cautiously. "Here they are." He reached for the tablet, examined it for a second, then said, "I'll give you $10 for everything." "What?" I let out a small, nervous laugh. "No, man. The deal was $100. He didn't argue. He just set the tablet down gently on the box of other gadgets and walked back to his car. Not a word. I waited for him to pull away, but for a full 30 seconds he just sat in his car, unmoving. Then suddenly he drove off. No headlights, no turn signal. I stood in my driveway, confused. I didn't understand what had just happened. It wasn't a normal interaction. And then, as I turned to go inside, something caught my eye. A smear on my front window. A face print. His face print. Had he been watching me through the window before knocking? A cold shiver ran down my spine. I went inside and locked every door. That night, I tried to push it out of my mind, just a weird dude, that's all. But at 11 p.m., when I went to get a drink, I glanced out the window and froze. The dark blue sedan was parked at the end of my street. My heart started pounding. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was just someone else's car. I turned off my living room light and stood by the window watching. At 11:30 p.m., The car was still there. At 12:15 a.m., it was gone. Relief washed over me. But just as I turned away from the window, I heard it. A knock, but not on the front door. This knock was coming from the side of the house. A quiet, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my throat. My phone was in my bedroom. If I ran to get it, I might make noise. Then another tap, 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 this time closer. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I stepped toward the window beside my front door. I pulled the curtain back an inch. Nothing. Just the dark, empty porch. Then, from the side yard, a shadow moved. I stumbled back, my chest tightening. I grabbed my phone, but before I could dial 911, a whisper came from the other side of the front door. "Hey, I changed my mind. I'll take the deal." My breath hitched, my hands trembled. He was standing at my door. He knew I was awake. Slowly, I backed away, gripping my phone. I typed out 911 but didn't press call yet. Maybe he would leave. Then, silence. No footsteps. No knocking. Minutes passed. I listened for movement. Nothing. Had he left? I stepped closer to the peephole. Nothing. But then, a loud, heavy thud against the house. I jumped back, nearly dropping my phone. It sounded like someone had slammed against the siding. Then leaves rustled. Something scraped against wood. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door. I finally pressed dial. The operator answered. I whispered everything, barely able to breathe. She told me to stay put, stay quiet. Officers were on their way. Then, outside my window, I heard panting. Not a dog, not a normal breath. This was wet, raspy breathing. I turned slowly. The window blinds were down, but there was a gap. A shadow passed over it. He was right outside. My bedroom, my body went ice cold. Then, scraping. I didn't understand at first. It wasn't at the window, it was above. The roof. Then it hit me. He wasn't trying to get in through the front door. He was trying to reach the second-floor balcony. My bedroom balcony. The one I had forgotten to lock. I bolted for the door, nearly tripping over myself. I ran into the hallway as fast as I could. Just as I reached the stairs, a heavy thump from my balcony. He was up there. I scrambled downstairs, throwing myself into the laundry room, locking the door. I crouched in the corner, barely able to breathe. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, sirens. Flashing lights poured through the windows. A voice yelled from outside. The police. I stayed frozen as I heard them shouting commands. Then footsteps running. A grunt. A crash. Silence. It took me a full 5 minutes before I could force myself to move. When I finally stepped outside, the police had Daniel pinned on the ground. His leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. He had jumped off my roof to escape. One officer walked up to me, his face pale. "You're lucky." I swallowed hard. What? What was he trying to do? The officer hesitated. Then finally he said, he wasn't trying to break in through the front door. I already knew what he was going to say. He was trying to get in through your bedroom window. I barely slept that night. By the next morning, I had booked a moving truck. I never used Craigslist again, and I never ever leave my windows unlocked.